Friends, thank you for being here today. We find ourselves gathered at a truly unprecedented juncture in modern history, a moment where the tectonic plates of global geopolitics are shifting beneath our feet. We are currently witnessing a massive, unexpected, and frankly astonishing shift in global politics. It is a period defined not by the triumphant march of globalization that characterized the late 20th century, but by a rising tide of instability, crushing economic pressure, and a pervasive, almost suffocating strategic uncertainty. At the very center of this geopolitical storm, radiating volatility outward, sits the current administration of the United States under Donald Trump. Yet, in the shadow of this immense disruption, a fascinating paradox has emerged. While the world braces for the next tariff threat or late-night social media declaration, one leader has risen above the chaotic noise. He has begun to stand out on the world stage, not through volume, not through bluster, and certainly not through aggressive confrontation, but through the quiet, unyielding power of consistency, unshakable credibility, and profound restraint. That leader, as you all know, is Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney. Now, think about what has happened in what feels like the blink of an eye. In just 1 year in office, Mark Carney has orchestrated a political transformation that will likely be studied in universities for generations. He has transitioned from an unconventional, perhaps even risky political pick, a man better known for boardrooms and central banks than for kissing babies on the campaign trail, into a figure that a growing global consensus now views as the most effective, formidable leader Canada has produced in decades. What makes this shift particularly striking and what demands our closest attention today is the exact context in which it has occurred. The core irony of our time is this: Donald Trump, the ultimate agent of political chaos, has accidentally forged Canada's strongest prime minister. Because while global politics has been entirely dominated by disruption, unpredictability, and the tearing up of the traditional rulebook, Carney has brilliantly positioned himself, and by extension, the entire nation of Canada, as the ultimate source of stability. That stark contrast is no longer just a footnote in his leadership. It is the defining characteristic of Canada's new, elevated role in the world. Before we dive into the exact blueprint of how he pulled this off, I want to hear from you. Do you think Mark Carney is the right leader for this specific moment in history, or do you prefer a more aggressive approach? Drop a yes or no and your reasoning in the comments below, and let's get back into it. But to truly grasp the sheer magnitude of what Carney has accomplished in his first year, we have to mentally step back into the storm he walked into. You simply cannot appreciate the anchor without understanding the violence of the storm. Over the past year, the entirety of global attention has been heavily, anxiously focused on the United States. Under Donald Trump's leadership, the bedrock assumptions of the post-war international order have been aggressively interrogated and, in many cases, dismantled. We have seen trade tensions escalate into full-blown economic warfare. We have witnessed tariff threats used not as a last resort, but as a primary tool of first-instance diplomacy. We have observed an increasingly confrontational, transactional approach to historical allies, introducing a level of existential uncertainty into international relations that absolutely no country, no matter how powerful, could safely ignore. And let's be perfectly clear, for Canada, this uncertainty was not some distant, theoretical, academic problem. It carried immediate, terrifying consequences. The United States is not merely Canada's closest ally. It is its most vital, irreplaceable economic partner. The two nations share the longest undefended border in the world, across which nearly $2 billion of goods and services flow every single day. The supply chains of the North American automotive industry, the agricultural sector, and the energy grid are so deeply intertwined that they function as a single living organism. Therefore, any instability, any whim of protectionism, any disruption in that relationship has direct, devastating implications for Canadian jobs, the stock market, national trade deficits, and long-term economic security. So, put yourself in that highly pressurized, deeply anxious environment. Suddenly, Canadian leadership ceased to be simply a matter of routine domestic governance. It was no longer just about passing healthcare budgets or debating provincial jurisdiction. It became a matter of pure, unadulterated strategic survival. It became a question of precise geopolitical positioning. Mark Carney's emergence must be viewed entirely through that specific, unforgiving lens. He did not rise in a vacuum. He did not become prime minister during a period of peaceful economic expansion where any competent manager could steer the ship. He rose in direct response to a historical moment that absolutely required a fundamentally different kind of leadership. The times called for a firefighter, not a cheerleader. And that, my friends, brings us to the stark, undeniable contrast that defines our current political landscape today. We are talking about a fundamental choice of substance over spectacle. Carney's spectacular rise is partly and significantly fueled by the immediate contrast with his predecessor, Justin Trudeau. After a decade of Trudeau's leadership, a tenure deeply defined by sunny ways, symbolic diplomacy, highly curated public relations, and a reliance on soft power, the Canadian public, and indeed the international community, were exhausted. They were hungry for a different approach. As the global temperature rose, the performative aspects of Trudeau's governance began to feel incredibly inadequate. Where Trudeau relied on charm and the politics of gesture, Carney arrived with a deeply pragmatic, almost ruthlessly analytical skill set. But the even more vital contrast, the one that is reshaping history, is the one playing out on the international stage between Ottawa and Washington. Donald Trump's approach to global affairs emphasizes maximal leverage, unrelenting pressure, and the aggressive pursuit of short-term, America-first advantages. While this strategy possesses its own brutal, transactional logic, it has undeniably introduced massive volatility into alliances that were historically bulletproof and predictable. Carney, conversely, is the living embodiment of the anti-Trump ethos. He prioritizes continuity. He champions economic stability, rather than violently testing the structural integrity of historical alliances. He has focused entirely on reinforcing them, rather than introducing new sources of tension into an already fragile global ecosystem. He has systematically sought to de-escalate and reduce them. Now, this is exactly where the sheer, undeniable power of Mark Carney's unique credibility completely changes the game. Mark Carney is not a career politician who learned about the economy from briefing binders. He is a man who has managed the engines of global finance. As the former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the enormously influential Bank of England, his background gives him a level of unparalleled, unassailable credibility that immediately resonates with other world leaders who are currently navigating similar domestic and international pressures. When Carney speaks at a G7 summit or a bilateral meeting, he isn't reciting talking points written by a political strategist. He is speaking the language of capital markets, of inflation targeting, of systemic risk management. He understands the mechanics of the global economy on a cellular level. Therefore, his approach to foreign policy has been grounded entirely in substance. It is relentlessly focused on coordinated responses to global challenges, pragmatic cooperation, and empirical reality. In a world drowning in populist rhetoric, Carney's spreadsheet logic offers a desperately needed lifeline. But this isn't just theory. This shift in tone and strategy has yielded spectacular, measurable global triumphs, transforming Canada from a polite participant into a heavy-hitting power player. Nothing illustrates Carney's incredible effectiveness quite like his highly scrutinized interactions with Donald Trump himself. Consider the dynamics of a modern bilateral meeting at the White House. It is an arena designed for power projection. Trump is famous for utilizing physical space and conversational dominance to throw his counterparts off balance. Reports frequently emerge of foreign leaders being made to sit in what is effectively a dunce chair, subjected to monologues and attempts to talk over them. Yet, watch what happens when Mark Carney enters that room. The dynamic fundamentally shifts. Even when Trump attempts to deploy his usual tactics, interrupting, talking over, dominating the airspace, Carney maintains an icy, impenetrable composure. The clips that emerge from these encounters are a masterclass in psychological judo. When Carney does speak, he doesn't raise his voice, he lowers it. He delivers precise, economically devastating points that are so inherently logical, so grounded in the undeniable realities of North American trade, that he forces the room into submission. He leaves the policy advisors and cabinet secretaries nodding in reluctant agreement. He disarms the chaos not by fighting it, but by freezing it with cold, hard competence. Think about how different this is from the recent past. Under the previous administration, Justin Trudeau was a well-known veteran face on the international circuit. He had been around longer than most leaders at a G7 summit. However, while he was liked, he was rarely relied upon to deliver the definitive, substantive blueprint for navigating a global crisis. The international community viewed Canada as a friendly neighbor, but not the architect of the future. Under Mark Carney, that perception has completely inverted. Countries that are themselves navigating the terrifying uncertainty of the modern age are increasingly engaging with Canada not out of diplomatic obligation, but out of desperate strategic interest. Take, for example, the recent highly telling developments with the Nordic countries. Knowing that Mark Carney was scheduled to be in Norway, an extraordinary thing happened. The leaders of all 5 Nordic nations, countries known for their own high standards of governance and strategic pragmatism, specifically organized a joint meeting just to sit down with the Canadian Prime Minister. Why? Because they recognize a shared existential reality. Like Canada, many of these nations are perched on the edge of the rapidly changing Arctic. They are dealing with shifting climate realities, the opening of new maritime trade routes, and the increasingly aggressive posturing of geopolitical rivals in the polar region. They looked at Washington and saw unpredictability. They looked at Ottawa and saw a leader who understands long-term strategic asset management. This is the Carney Draw. It is the magnetic pull of a leader who offers a measured, deeply informed perspective, perfectly aligned with the preservation of long-term stability. But let us dig a little deeper into exactly why this Carney Draw is so incredibly potent right now, especially when we talk about the flow of global wealth. We have to recognize that we are not just living through a temporary political realignment. We are living through a violent, fundamental restructuring of the global economic architecture. The era of frictionless hyper-globalization, where supply chains stretched infinitely across the globe, based purely on the cheapest cost of labor, is dead and buried. We have definitively entered the age of economic security, where nations and megacorporations are desperately scrambling to secure access to critical resources, advanced technologies, and dependable, secure manufacturing hubs. In Washington, the immediate instinct to handle this paradigm shift has been to build a fortress. The primary strategy of the current administration is to weaponize access to the American consumer, slapping tariffs on allies and adversaries alike, forcing compliance through blunt economic trauma. Mark Carney, however, looked at the exact same fractured map and executed a completely different play. He intuitively understood that in a world where global supply chains are being aggressively and unpredictably rerouted, trust is rapidly becoming the most valuable and highly sought-after commodity on the planet. Consider for a moment the high-stakes race for the economy of tomorrow. We are talking about the green energy transition, the colossal infrastructure required to power artificial intelligence, and the mass manufacturing of electric vehicles. Canada happens to sit on an absolute goldmine of the critical minerals, clean energy grid, and fresh water necessary to power this next century. Under previous administrations, this incredible natural advantage was often treated as an environmental talking point or a vague, distant promise for the future. Under Mark Carney, it has been completely transformed into a ruthlessly executed, globally marketed business plan. He isn't just attending climate summits to sign non-binding pledges for the cameras. He is sitting down behind closed doors with the CEOs of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds, multinational manufacturers, and tech titans. And because he speaks the native language of capital allocators, because he understands risk-adjusted returns, bond yields, and systemic stability better than any politician alive, he is closing the deals that actually matter. Put yourself in the shoes of a board of directors sitting in Stuttgart or Tokyo or Seoul right now. You have $10 billion of capital to deploy for a massive new advanced manufacturing facility. You look to the United States, historically the safest bet in the world, and what do you see? You see the very real threat of overnight tariffs, regulatory whiplash, and a political climate that treats foreign investment as a hostage to be traded on a whim. Then you look north to Canada. You see a nation governed by a former central banker offering you a highly educated workforce, a secure, integrated North American supply chain, and a promise of stable democratic institutions. Most importantly, you get a sovereign handshake from a prime minister that actually means something. It is no longer a difficult choice for these boards. It is a fiduciary duty. This is the concept economists call friendshoring, the act of relocating supply chains to trusted allied nations. But Carney has taken this dry academic concept and elevated it into a potent geopolitical weapon. He has masterfully leveraged the volatility of the Trump administration to position Canada as the ultimate safe harbor for global capital. He has taken Canada's long-standing, sometimes mocked reputation for being polite and forged it into an ironclad reputation for bankable reliability. He isn't just protecting the Canadian economy from the storm, he is actively diverting the world's wealth into Canadian ports. Quick pause here. If you are finding this deep dive into global macroeconomics and geopolitics valuable, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It tells the algorithm that you want more substantive, high-level analysis, and it really helps us keep making it for you. Now, you might be asking, does this international praise and macroeconomic strategy actually matter to everyday people? The answer is absolutely yes. This evolving, glowing global perception hasn't happened in a vacuum. It has paid an incredible, unprecedented domestic dividend right here at home. The competence Carney projects internationally has had massive, undeniable ripple effects in local communities. Canadians are not blind. They are watching the evening news. They see the chaos engulfing their southern neighbor. They see the economic storm clouds gathering over Europe and Asia. And they see their prime minister navigating this incredibly treacherous global landscape with a level of skill and quiet dignity that makes them profoundly proud. This international respect translates directly into domestic political capital. Just look at the empirical data. The numbers we are seeing right now are nothing short of historic. Just a little more than a year since he took the oath of office, Mark Carney is more popular with Canadians than ever before, and his personal popularity is single-handedly resuscitating and turbocharging the Liberal Party brand. According to recent gold standard Nanos research surveys, the political landscape of Canada has been entirely rewritten. The top-line numbers show the governing Liberals with a massive, growing lead over the opposition Conservatives, a lead that currently sits at a staggering 16 percentage points. If an election were held today, nearly 48% of the Canadian electorate, almost half of the entire voting population, would cast their ballot for the Liberal Party. The Conservatives have plummeted to 31%, and the New Democrats are languishing at a mere 11%. To put this into historical perspective, no political party in Canada has achieved such a stratospheric level of public support in any major poll since January of 2025, in the chaotic days immediately following Justin Trudeau's resignation. Back then, it was the Conservative Party that held the commanding lead, a lead that evaporated like mist the moment Canadians actually went to the polls and opted for Carney's steady hand. So what exactly is driving this monumental trend? It boils down to one word: leadership. When Canadians are asked the fundamental question of who they prefer as Prime Minister, the results are an absolute bloodbath for the opposition. Nearly 57% of Canadians explicitly chose Mark Carney. He is vastly outperforming his own party's historical brand. In stark, brutal contrast, only 22% of Canadians chose the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre. And we have to ask ourselves, why has the populist momentum of the Conservative opposition stalled so dramatically? It is because the psychology of the electorate shifts radically when the threat level rises. In times of relative peace and prosperity, voters might entertain the fiery rhetoric of a populist disruptor. They might enjoy the spectacle of political grievance. But when the geopolitical house next door is on fire, when trade wars threaten their mortgages, and when global stability feels like it is hanging by a thread, voters do not want an arsonist. They want an architect. They want the smartest, most experienced manager in the room. They look at Mark Carney, a man who has steered entire economies through the 2008 financial crisis and the turbulence of Brexit, and they see safety. This is not simply a reaction to external events. It is a visceral response to the perception that Canada is finally being represented on the world stage by an adult who deeply understands both the terrifying risks and the hidden opportunities of the current era. At a time when anxiety is the dominant global currency, Carney's aura of competence carries immeasurable, impenetrable political weight. All of this momentum inevitably leads us to a question that we are now hearing openly in coffee shops, boardrooms, and university halls across the country. How should Mark Carney's first year in office be evaluated in the grand sweep of Canadian history? It is, of course, still early. The life of a government is long, and unforeseen crises inevitably lie ahead. Such historical comparisons must always be made carefully and with a degree of academic restraint. However, the argument forming in his favor is neither difficult to understand nor hard to defend. Mark Carney assumed the highest office in the land at a moment of acutely elevated global risk, facing the most unpredictable American administration in a century, amidst shifting alliances and economic fragility. In that terrifying crucible, he has not just survived, he has thrived. He has masterfully managed to position Canada as the ultimate sanctuary of stability, a beacon of credibility, and an increasingly vital, indispensable player in international discussions. Does this automatically, permanently cement him as one of the greatest leaders in Canadian history? Perhaps not today, but it undeniably places his first 12 months in a hyper-elite category that demands our absolute, most serious consideration. Because as it stands today, looking back at the whirlwind of the past year, one fact is simply indisputable. Mark Carney has fundamentally and irreversibly altered how Canada is perceived globally. In an environment entirely defined by the anxiety of uncertainty, Canada has come to represent something incredibly rare and increasingly valuable on the open geopolitical market. It represents stability, it represents reliability, it represents clear, unclouded strategic vision. While other global leaders, driven by ego and populism, have introduced toxic volatility into global relationships, Mark Carney has quietly, methodically emphasized continuity and deep cooperation. And let me leave you with this thought. That distinction is not merely a matter of personal style or polite Canadian branding. It has tangible, profound consequences for how countries engage with one another, where they choose to invest their capital, and who they trust with their strategic secrets. Whether this remarkable, upward trajectory continues will naturally depend on how effectively Carney's government addresses the grinding, everyday domestic challenges, housing, healthcare, inflation, in the months and years ahead. But for now, as we close out this extraordinary first year, one sweeping conclusion is virtually impossible to avoid. Canada is no longer a middle power simply reacting to global developments, hoping to avoid the crossfire of the giants. It has ceased to be a mere spectator to history. Under the meticulous, iron-willed, and brilliant leadership of Mark Carney, Canada is stepping into the breach. It is actively helping to shape the future of the free world. And that monumental shift, friends, is the true legacy of a leader who looked at a world gone mad and simply refused to blink. Now, I turn the question over to you. Will Mark Carney's momentum hold up as he faces the inevitable domestic hurdles ahead, or is this international honeymoon phase going to end? I read every single comment, so let me know your predictions down below. And if you want clear, unapologetic analysis of the biggest geopolitical shifts shaping Canada and the world, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a report. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.